A millionaire catches a poor 7-year-old girl singing to his paralyzed son, who wouldn't stop crying at his mother's funeral, and what he does next will break your heart. Before we unfold this journey, press like and share where you're from and your favorite life lesson. The black limousine pulled up to St. Mary's Cathedral on that cold February morning, its polished surface reflecting the grey Seattle sky like a mirror of grief. Inside, 42-year-old tech mogul Marcus Wellington adjusted his 6-year-old son Tommy's tiny black suit one more time, his hands trembling with a father's desperate helplessness. The contrast between the luxury vehicle and the broken family inside couldn't have been starker. "Daddy, why won't Mommy wake up?" Tommy whispered, his small fingers clutching the wheelchair's armrest with white knuckles. The car accident 3 months ago had taken more than just Sarah Wellington's life. It had stolen Tommy's ability to walk, leaving Marcus to navigate this nightmare alone. The doctors said the spinal injury was permanent, but it was the emotional damage that worried Marcus most. As they entered the cathedral, Tommy's soft whimpering began to escalate into the heart-wrenching sobs that had become their daily torment. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceilings, causing heads to turn and whispers to ripple through the gathering of Seattle's elite. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he knelt beside the wheelchair, his expensive suit wrinkled from countless nights of falling asleep in hospital chairs. "Please, son, just for a little while," Marcus began, but Tommy's cries only grew louder, more desperate. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some checking their watches, others exchanging meaningful glances. This was supposed to be Sarah's memorial service, a celebration of the woman who had built 3 successful charities before turning 35, not a display of a child's uncontrolled grief. The cathedral's massive wooden doors creaked open, and Father Mackenzie approached with practiced compassion. "Perhaps we should begin," he suggested gently, though concern flickered across his weathered face. 200 of Seattle's most influential people waited in the pews, but Tommy's anguish filled every corner of the sacred space. Then from somewhere behind them came a sound that shouldn't have been there, a voice so pure, so achingly beautiful, that it seemed to float down from heaven itself. A 7-year-old girl with tangled brown hair and a dress that had seen better days was singing softly, almost inaudibly, "Amazing Grace." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had known loss intimately. Tommy's sobs began to quiet, his tear-streaked face turning toward the source of the melody. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat, his heart hammering against his ribs. The voice reminded him so powerfully of Sarah's lullabies that for one impossible moment he thought his wife had returned to comfort their son. The hair on his arms stood up as memories flooded back. Sarah singing Tommy to sleep during his colicky infancy, her voice floating through their home during dinner preparations. The little girl stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the marble floor, continuing to sing with a voice that carried all the innocence of childhood, yet all the wisdom of someone who had known real loss. Around them, the entire cathedral fell into a reverent hush, 200 of the city's most powerful people captivated by a homeless child's gift. Even Margaret Harrison, Sarah's formidable mother, stopped adjusting her pearls to listen. As the last note faded into the cathedral's ancient stones, Tommy reached out his small hand toward the girl with desperate hope. "Will you sing more?" he whispered, his voice breaking on each word. "Please? It makes the hurt go away." The girl nodded solemnly, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest, the first crack in the wall of grief he'd built around his heart. The girl's name was Emma Rodriguez, and she had been living in Pioneer Square with her grandmother Rosa for the past 8 months, ever since her mother died in a factory accident in California. Rosa, 73, and battling lung cancer with stubborn determination, had brought Emma to the cathedral that morning not to attend the memorial, but to seek shelter from the February rain that had been falling for 3 days straight, turning their cardboard shelter into a soggy mess. "Mija, we cannot stay here long," Rosa whispered in heavily accented English, her weathered hand gently stroking Emma's hair as they huddled in the back pew. "This is for important people, not for people like us." Her voice carried the weight of a lifetime of being invisible, of being moved along by security guards and well-meaning church volunteers. But Emma had heard the crying, a sound she recognized from her own nights when the hunger pangs kept her awake, when Rosa's coughing fits scared her into thinking she might lose the only family she had left. The little boy's pain called to something deep in her 7-year-old heart, the same instinct that made her sing to Rosa during the worst nights when the cancer pain made her grandmother weep. Rosa had been a professional singer in Mexico City before immigrating to the United States 40 years ago, following dreams that had slowly crumbled under the weight of language barriers and prejudice. "Music is the universal language, Mija," she would tell Emma during their long walks through the city. "When words fail, songs speak to the heart." Marcus Wellington found himself walking toward them, Tommy's wheelchair gliding smoothly across the marble floor. Every eye in the cathedral followed their movement, but Marcus no longer cared about appearances or propriety. His son hadn't stopped crying, really stopped, in 3 months. The therapists, the medications, the expensive specialists, nothing had worked, until now. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. Up close, he could see the telltale signs of poverty, the carefully mended dress held together with mismatched thread, the too thin frame that spoke of skipped meals, the shoes held together with duct tape. Yet her eyes held a light that seemed to illuminate the entire cathedral, a spark that reminded him painfully of Sarah's unwavering optimism. "Emma," she replied softly, then looked at Tommy with gentle concern that seemed far too mature for her age. "Why is he so sad? Did someone hurt him?" Her small hand instinctively moved toward Tommy's wheelchair, not with curiosity, but with understanding. She recognized broken things. "His mother went to heaven," Marcus explained, surprised by how easily the words came when speaking to this child. Usually, explaining Sarah's death felt like swallowing glass. "He misses her very much. They were very close." Emma nodded solemnly, her eyes growing distant for a moment. "My mama went to heaven too. Abuela says she watches over us, but sometimes I wish she could sing to me one more time." Then, focusing back on Tommy with fierce determination, she began to sing again. This time, "You Are My Sunshine," the same song Rosa sang to her when the nightmares came. Tommy's hand found Emma's, and for the first time since the accident, Marcus saw something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope flickering in his son's eyes like a candle flame refusing to be extinguished. Rosa started to stand, clearly uncomfortable with the attention they were receiving from Seattle's elite, but Marcus gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Please," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't go. Not yet. I think you might be angels." 2 hours later, the memorial service had transformed into something none of the attendees would ever forget. Emma had sung 7 songs, each one requested by Tommy, who seemed to find pieces of his shattered world reassembling with every note. The congregation, initially uncomfortable with the disruption of their carefully planned ceremony, found themselves wiping away tears as the homeless child's voice filled the sacred space with unexpected healing. Father Mackenzie had quietly adjusted his prepared remarks, speaking instead about unexpected angels and divine interventions. "Sometimes," he said from the pulpit, his voice carrying across the cathedral, "God sends us exactly what we need in the most unexpected packages. Today, we've witnessed such a miracle. Marcus learned that Rosa had been battling her illness alone, too proud to seek help, too afraid of deportation, despite her legal status to access proper medical care. Emma has the gift, Rosa explained in her broken English, pride and sadness mixing in her tired eyes as she watched her granddaughter teach Tommy simple hand-clapping games. But gifts, they need food, shelter, safety. These things we do not have anymore. The medical bills from her factory job injury had consumed their savings. Emma's mother, Carmen, had died not from the accident itself, but from complications that developed because she'd waited too long to seek treatment, afraid of the costs. Now Rosa was repeating the same deadly pattern, and they both knew it. The Wellington family attorney, David Chen, approached Marcus with obvious concern, his usual professional composure cracking. "The media is already gathering outside," he warned quietly, gesturing toward the cathedral doors where camera flashes were visible through the stained glass. "This could complicate the foundation transfers, the board meetings scheduled for next week. Sarah's parents are asking pointed questions about the unusual circumstances." But Marcus wasn't listening to the politics anymore. He was watching Emma show Tommy how to fold paper cranes, a skill Rosa had taught her during their long nights in the shelter when sleep wouldn't come. For every crane Tommy successfully completed, Emma would sing a few bars of a new song, and each time his son would laugh, actually laugh, something Marcus had begun to fear he'd never hear again. "The boy needs music therapy," Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Tommy's pediatric therapist, whispered to Marcus. "I've been recommending it for weeks, but he's refused to engage with anyone, yet here he is, participating naturally. This child seems to be providing exactly what our formal therapy couldn't achieve." "Mr. Wellington," came a voice from behind him, sharp as a blade, cutting through silk. He turned to see Margaret Harrison, Sarah's mother, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer black dress marking her as Seattle royalty. Her blue eyes, so much like Sarah's but lacking their warmth, surveyed the scene with obvious disapproval. "While this has been touching, perhaps it's time to return to the planned program. Sarah deserves proper remembrance, not a circus." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a protective instinct he hadn't felt since Sarah's death. The same fierce determination that had built his technology empire from nothing. "This is proper remembrance, Margaret. This is exactly what Sarah would have wanted. She spent her life helping children like Emma." The tension in the cathedral grew thick as family members and business associates began to whisper among themselves, their voices creating an undercurrent of judgment and concern. Sarah's memorial was becoming something entirely different from what had been planned, and not everyone approved of the direction it was taking. But Tommy was smiling for the first time in 3 months, and Marcus would face down the entire Seattle social establishment to protect that precious sight. "Daddy," Tommy said, tugging on Marcus's suit jacket with surprising strength, "can Emma come home with us? Please? I think Mommy would like her." The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting for an answer, its innocence cutting through the political undercurrents swirling around them. Margaret Harrison's sharp intake of breath was audible even above the murmured conversations of the departing guests. David Chen immediately stepped closer, his legal mind already racing through the complications such an arrangement would create. Custody laws, background checks, media scrutiny. "Tommy, sweetie," Marcus began carefully, his heart breaking at the hope shining in his son's eyes. "Emma has her grandmother. They have their own home." Even as he said the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. Rosa's tired eyes and Emma's too thin frame told a different story, one written in missed meals and sleepless nights in doorways. Rosa struggled to her feet with the dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime fighting to maintain her pride in impossible circumstances. "We are grateful for your kindness, Senor, but we do not need charity. Emma and I, we take care of each other." The words were brave, but a violent coughing fit seized her immediately after, blood speckling the tissue she pressed to her lips. Emma immediately moved to support her grandmother's frail frame, her small hands surprisingly strong as she guided Rosa back to the pew. "Abuela, please don't be stubborn," she whispered in Spanish, then switched to English. "The nice man wants to help." The tender care the 7-year-old showed for her grandmother revealed a maturity far beyond her years, and Marcus felt his heart break a little more. Margaret Harrison seized the moment like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Marcus, you're clearly not thinking straight. The grief has clouded your judgment completely. These people are strangers. We know nothing about their background, their intentions. You can't possibly be considering bringing them into Tommy's life permanently." What I'm considering," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded boardrooms and built a billion-dollar tech empire, "is that my son is smiling for the first time since we lost Sarah. What I'm considering is that this little girl has given us something no amount of therapy or medication could provide." Doctor Walsh had been quietly observing from the side aisle, her professional training warring with the undeniable evidence of her eyes. She now approached the group, her usual clinical demeanor softened by what she'd witnessed. "Marcus, I've never seen Tommy respond to anyone the way he's responding to Emma. From a therapeutic standpoint, this connection could be incredibly beneficial for his recovery. Music therapy, peer support, shared trauma experience, all the elements are here." Tommy had wheeled his chair closer to Emma and was now showing her the small toy airplane his mother had given him the day before the accident, his most precious possession. "This was Mommy's favorite," he explained, with the solemnity of a child sharing sacred secrets. "She said it would help me fly, even though my legs don't work anymore. She said dreams can take you anywhere." Emma accepted the precious toy with the reverence of someone who understood the weight of treasured objects, her small fingers tracing its wings with infinite care. "My mama gave me this before she went to heaven too," she said, pulling out a small silver cross on a chain that looked far too large around her thin neck. "She said it would keep me safe always." The parallel wasn't lost on anyone present, and even Margaret Harrison fell silent, her opposition temporarily neutralized by the raw emotion of the moment. Father Mackenzie stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. These children have been through enough public scrutiny for one day." But Tommy wasn't finished. "Emma," he said, his voice stronger than Marcus had heard it in months, "if you came to our house, we could sing together every day, and I could show you my mom's piano. She always said music makes everything better." Within an hour, the cathedral had emptied, except for the unlikely group that had formed around Tommy's wheelchair. Marcus, David Chen, Dr. Walsh, Emma, Rosa, and Father Mackenzie. The massive space felt different now, more intimate, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for a decision that would change everything. Marcus found himself making a choice that would have seemed impossible just that morning, his business instincts warring with his father's heart and losing decisively. He turned to Rosa, seeing past her worn clothing to the dignity and strength that had kept her granddaughter safe in impossible circumstances. "I have a proposal," he said carefully, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "My house has more rooms than we know what to do with. Tommy needs help with his physical therapy, his emotional healing. Emma seems to provide something that all our expensive specialists couldn't. And you, Rosa, you need medical care that you're not getting." Rosa's eyes flashed with the fire of someone who had fought for dignity her entire life, who had cleaned office buildings at night to put food on the table while studying English during the day. "We are not beggars, Mr. Wellington. Emma has talent, yes, but we do not sell ourselves for comfort. We have survived worse than this." "I'm not buying anything," Marcus replied gently, remembering Sarah's lessons about approaching proud people with respect rather than pity. "I'm offering a trade. Emma gives Tommy something to smile about, something I'd pay any amount to see again. You give me the peace of knowing that both children have what they need. I give you a safe place to heal, and Emma a chance to develop her gift properly. David Chen cleared his throat uncomfortably, his briefcase clutched like a shield against the emotional complexity of the situation. Marcus, the legal implications alone are staggering. Background checks, custody considerations, tax implications. And the media attention this will generate could affect the Foundation's work, the board's confidence in your leadership decisions. We need to think this through carefully. Father Mackenzie stepped forward, his years of counseling broken families evident in his approach. There are ways to do this properly, legally. Foster care arrangements, temporary guardianship options that could make this work for everyone involved. The church has connections with social services, people who understand special circumstances. But Tommy had made his own decision with the clarity that only children possess. He reached out and took Emma's hand with a determination that reminded Marcus powerfully of Sarah's stubborn optimism. Please stay with us, Emma. I'll teach you about airplanes and computers and all the stuff my mom taught me. And you can teach me more songs. We could be like family. Emma looked up at her grandmother, her 7-year-old wisdom reading the exhaustion in Rosa's eyes, the way she struggled to breathe, the fear she tried to hide behind determined smiles. Abuela, the nice man has a big house. Maybe you could rest better there. Maybe the doctors could help you get better. Doctor. Walsh nodded slowly, her clinical assessment overriding her personal reservations. There are programs, Marcus, specialized arrangements that could benefit everyone. Tommy needs socialization with other children, especially those who understand loss. Emma needs stability, education, proper nutrition. Rosa needs medical care immediately. The cathedral doors opened with a crash, and Margaret Harrison strode back in, her heels clicking sharply against the marble like gunshots. She'd clearly been making phone calls, and her expression suggested the conversations hadn't gone well. This is insanity, Marcus. Sarah would never have approved of such reckless behavior. You're making decisions based on emotion, not logic. This will end badly for everyone involved. As she stalked toward them, her purse clutched like a weapon. Marcus wondered if she might be right. But then he looked at Tommy's face, truly peaceful for the first time since the accident, and he knew that some risks were worth taking, especially when the alternative was watching his son disappear into grief. "What do you say, Rosa?" he asked quietly, ignoring Margaret's approaching storm. "Will you let us try to help each other?" "Anki!" The answer came not in words, but in the way Rosa's weathered hand slowly reached out to touch Marcus's arm, her calloused fingers trembling with exhaustion and hope. "For Emma," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of surrender. "I will try. But if this brings trouble to your family, we leave immediately. We know how to disappear." 3 weeks later, the Wellington mansion on Mercer Island had been transformed from a mausoleum of grief into something approaching a home again. What had once echoed with the hollow silence of loss now rang with the sound of Tommy's laughter and Emma's singing. The two children had become inseparable, Emma pushing Tommy's wheelchair through the vast halls while he told her stories about every piece of art, every family photo, every room that held memories of his mother. Marcus had converted Sarah's old studio into a music room for Emma, installing a piano and professional recording equipment. The first time Emma sat at Sarah's piano and began to play, Marcus had to leave the room, overcome by the bittersweet beauty of life continuing in unexpected ways. Her natural ability was remarkable. She could play by ear songs she'd only heard once, harmonizing with herself in ways that made even the household staff stop their work to listen. Rosa had been admitted to Seattle Cancer Care Alliance, where Dr. Patricia Santos had immediately put her on an aggressive treatment plan. "She should have come to us months ago," Dr. Santos told Marcus during one of their consultations. her tone professional but tinged with frustration. "But the good news is that we caught it before it metastasized to her brain. We're going to fight this thing with everything we have." Emma visited her grandmother every day after Tommy's therapy sessions, often bringing drawings the two children had created together. Elaborate stories told in crayon about flying wheelchairs and magical songs that could heal anything. The hospital staff had begun to gather around room 418 whenever Emma sang, her voice providing comfort not just to Rosa, but to other patients struggling with their own battles against mortality. The legal arrangements had been surprisingly smooth, thanks to Father Mackenzie's connections and Tommy's obvious improvement. Emma was enrolled in the same private school Tommy would attend when he was ready, and a tutor came to the house 3 times a week. Her academic abilities matched her musical gifts. She was reading at a high school level and showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics. Margaret Harrison, however, had made good on her implied threat, calling an emergency meeting of the Sarah Wellington Foundation board. "My daughter's memory is being tarnished by this circus," she declared to the assembled trustees, her voice cutting through the conference room like ice. "Marcus is clearly unstable, making rash decisions that could jeopardize everything Sarah worked to build. The media attention alone has been embarrassing." But the other board members had seen the news coverage, not the sensationalized gossip Margaret had feared, but genuinely moving stories about a grieving father and son finding hope through an act of kindness. Donations to the foundation had actually increased by 40% since Emma and Rosa had moved in, and several major corporations had reached out about partnership opportunities. The real test came on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Tommy had his worst day since Emma's arrival. Physical therapy had been particularly brutal, and the reality of his permanent paralysis hit him with renewed force after another child at therapy had walked out on legs that would never fail him. Tommy had locked himself in his room, refusing to see anyone, even Emma. She sat outside his door for 2 hours, occasionally singing softly, waiting with the patience of someone who understood that grief couldn't be rushed. Finally, she began a song Rosa had taught her, a Mexican lullaby about a little bird that couldn't fly but found other ways to touch the sky. Through its song, through its courage, through its refusal to surrender to despair. Slowly, the door opened, revealing Tommy's tear-streaked face. "I'm not a little bird, Emma," he said, his voice raw with pain. "I'm just broken. I'll never be normal again." Emma took his hand with the wisdom of someone who had lost everything and found hope anyway, her small fingers intertwining with his. "Maybe we're both a little broken, Tommy, but maybe that's okay. Maybe broken things can still be beautiful. Maybe they can even be more beautiful, because they've learned how to sing through the cracks." As Marcus listened from the hallway, his heart swelling with pride and pain in equal measure, he realized that his decision hadn't just saved Emma and Rosa, it had saved his family. But he had no idea that their greatest test was still approaching, and that Margaret Harrison was planning something that could tear their newfound happiness apart forever. 6 months after that life-changing morning at St. Mary's Cathedral, the Wellington household had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, until the registered letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in August. Marcus stood in his home office, the legal document trembling in his hands, as he read the words that could destroy everything they'd built together. Margaret Harrison had filed for emergency custody of Tommy, claiming that Marcus was providing an unstable environment by housing unvetted strangers with his traumatized son. The petition, filed in King County Superior Court, painted a picture of a grieving father whose judgment had been compromised by loss, making decisions that endangered his child's welfare and financial future. "She's using Emma and Rosa against us," David Chen explained grimly, spreading the legal papers across Marcus's mahogany desk. She claims that Tommy's dependency on Emma is unhealthy, that he's being used as a therapy tool for a homeless child with unknown psychological issues. She has 3 child psychologists ready to testify. Outside, Tommy and Emma were in the garden, Emma pushing his wheelchair between the rose bushes while singing a song she'd composed about flowers that bloomed in different seasons but shared the same soil. Their laughter drifted through the open windows, a stark contrast to the legal storm gathering around them. Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis again, the same helpless rage he'd experienced watching Tommy's legs fail to respond after the accident. "What are our chances?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Honestly, Margaret Harrison is Seattle royalty with unlimited resources and political connections. She's portraying herself as the concerned grandmother trying to save her grandson from his father's poor judgment. The fact that Rosa's immigration status, while legal, involves expired work visas from 20 years ago doesn't help our case." Dr. Walsh had been conducting regular evaluations of Tommy's progress, and her reports were unequivocally positive. His depression had lifted dramatically, his physical therapy participation had increased by 300%, and his social development was accelerating beyond all expectations. But Margaret's lawyers had found 3 specialists willing to argue that Tommy's improvement was masking a dangerous dependency that would ultimately harm his development. "There's more," David continued reluctantly. "She's questioning the foundation's finances, suggesting that your personal decisions are affecting your business judgment. The board meeting she called resulted in a formal review of your leadership. Not a removal, but enough doubt to give her custody petition credibility." Emma appeared in the doorway, her intuitive nature sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the house like smoke. "Mr. Marcus, is everything okay? Everything? Tommy wants to show you the song we wrote, but you look scared." Marcus knelt down to her level, struggling to keep his voice steady. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that the happiness she'd brought into their lives was being used as evidence against them? "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Why don't you and Tommy practice your song? I'll be out in a few minutes." But as Emma skipped away, Marcus knew that everything was far from fine. Margaret Harrison had declared war, and she had the ammunition to win. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following month, and if she succeeded, not only would he lose Tommy, but Emma and Rosa would likely be removed from the home as well. Rosa would lose her medical coverage, Emma would lose her stability, and Tommy would lose the light that had brought him back from the darkness. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, feeling more helpless than he had since Sarah's death. "We fight," David replied grimly. "But we need to be prepared for the possibility that we might lose everything." The Seattle media had discovered the custody battle within days, turning it into a sensation that divided the city along class and cultural lines. "Millionaire's mercy or dangerous delusion," screamed the headline in the Seattle Times, while social media exploded with opinions about whether Marcus Wellington was a saint or a fool. Rosa's condition had stabilized under Dr. Santos's care, but the stress of the legal proceedings was taking its toll. She'd lost 12 pounds in 2 weeks, and her carefully managed pain was breaking through the medications. "I should take Emma and leave," she told Marcus one evening as they sat in the hospital's family room. "This trouble is because of us. We brought this to your family." "You brought joy to my family," Marcus replied firmly. "You brought my son back to life. I won't let Margaret Harrison destroy that because she can't understand what love looks like when it doesn't come wrapped in money and social status." Emma had become quieter, her natural intuition picking up on the adults' anxiety despite their attempts to shield her. She still sang to Tommy every day, but her songs had taken on a melancholy quality that broke Marcus's heart. The night before, he'd found her standing at Sarah's piano, playing a haunting melody she claimed had come to her in a dream. In the dream, Emma had explained. "A lady with yellow hair like Tommy's mama was singing with me. She said not to be afraid, that families are made by love, not by papers. Do you think she was Tommy's mama?" The description was so perfectly Sarah, down to her habit of humming while she played piano, that Marcus had to excuse himself to compose his emotions. Sarah would have fought Margaret Harrison with everything she had, and he owed it to her memory to do the same. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Santos had been following the case in the news and was outraged by the implications for Rosa's care. "This woman will die without proper treatment," she told the hospital's legal team, "and that little girl has been the best therapy her grandmother could have. Separating them now would be medical malpractice." Dr. Santos agreed to testify on Rosa's behalf, and her reputation in the medical community carried significant weight. More importantly, she documented Rosa's improvement since moving into the Wellington home, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. The stability had literally added months to her life expectancy. The second breakthrough came from Tommy himself. Dr. Walsh had suggested that he was old enough to express his preferences to the court, and when asked where he wanted to live, his answer was unequivocal. "With Daddy and Emma and Abuela Rosa, they're my family now. Grandma Margaret doesn't understand that Mommy sent Emma to help us." But Margaret Harrison wasn't finished. She hired private investigators who discovered that Emma's father was unknown, listed as father unknown on her birth certificate. This allowed Margaret's lawyers to argue that Emma's background was fundamentally unstable and that she represented a potential security risk to the Wellington family. "She's grasping at straws," David assured Marcus, but they both knew that in family court perception often mattered more than reality. Margaret was painting Emma as a charity case gone wrong, a well-meaning gesture that had spiraled out of control. The preliminary hearing was set for the following Friday, and the judge would determine whether the case had enough merit to proceed to a full custody trial. If he ruled in Margaret's favor, Tommy could be removed from Marcus's home immediately, pending the final decision. That night, as Marcus tucked Tommy into bed, his son asked the question that had been haunting them all. "Daddy, what happens to Emma if Grandma Margaret wins? Will she have to go back to living outside?" Marcus couldn't bring himself to lie, but he also couldn't bear to confirm his son's worst fears. "We're going to fight for our family, Tommy. All of us. That's what families do. They protect each other." But as he turned off the lights and listened to Emma's voice drifting from the next room as she sang Rosa to sleep over the phone, Marcus wondered if love would be enough to overcome money, power, and social prejudice. In 3 days, they would find out if their unconventional family could survive the legal system's narrow definition of what was best for children. The King County Courthouse felt like a mausoleum on the morning of the preliminary hearing, its marble halls echoing with the footsteps of lawyers, families, and the broken dreams of custody battles past. Marcus arrived with David Chen and Dr. Walsh, while Margaret Harrison swept in with a team of 3 attorneys, each carrying briefcases that probably cost more than most people's cars. Tommy had insisted on attending, despite David's concerns about exposing him to the proceedings. "Emma needs to see that I'm fighting for her too," he'd said, with the fierce determination that reminded Marcus so powerfully of Sarah. Emma sat between Marcus and Rosa, her small hand gripping Rosa's with white knuckles, while Rosa struggled to hide her labored breathing. Judge Patricia Rodriguez reviewed the case files with the methodical precision of someone who had seen too many families torn apart by well-meaning relatives and bitter disputes. At 55, she had a reputation for fairness, but also for cutting through emotional appeals to focus on legal facts and children's welfare. Margaret Harrison's lead attorney, Charles Whitman, presented their case with devastating efficiency. "Your Honor, We're not here to question Mr. Wellington's love for his son. We're here because grief has clouded his judgment to the point where he's endangering Tommy's emotional and psychological development." Whitman painted a picture of Tommy's unhealthy dependence on Emma, his withdrawal from age-appropriate activities, and his increasing resistance to working with professional therapists in favor of an untrained 7-year-old girl. He produced reports from child psychologists who had never met Tommy, but were willing to testify that his attachment to Emma showed signs of trauma bonding that could harm his long-term development. Furthermore, Whitman continued, the financial implications of Mr. Wellington's decisions are concerning. The Foundation's board has documented irregular spending patterns, lavish medical expenses for non-family members, and decision-making processes that bypass normal financial oversight. This suggests that his personal choices are affecting his business acumen and, by extension, Tommy's financial security. When Dr. Walsh took the stand, she faced a brutal cross-examination that tried to paint her support for the arrangement as unprofessional and potentially influenced by her personal friendship with the Wellington family. But her documentation was meticulous, and her testimony was unwavering. Tommy's improvement was not only genuine, but had exceeded every therapeutic goal they'd set. "I've worked with traumatized children for 23 years, she stated firmly. "I've never seen a child respond so positively to any intervention." Tommy Wellington is thriving in ways that conventional therapy could never have achieved. Rosa's testimony, delivered in halting English supplemented by a court interpreter, brought tears to the gallery. She spoke about Emma's gift, about the responsibility she felt to nurture it, and about her gratitude for the chance to see her granddaughter grow up in safety and love rather than poverty and fear. "Emma, she is like the flowers in Mr. Marcus's garden," Rosa said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "In the streets, she was dying, but she still sang. Now she has good soil, good water, good light. She blooms, and her blooming helps the little boy bloom too. This is what families do. They help each other grow." But the most powerful moment came when Emma herself was called to testify. Judge Rodriguez had created a child-friendly environment, speaking to Emma at eye level while court reporters recorded every word of their conversation. "Emma, do you like living with Mr. Marcus and Tommy?" the judge asked gently. "Yes, ma'am. They're my family now. Tommy teaches me about airplanes and computers, and I teach him songs that make the sadness go away. We take care of each other. What would happen if you had to leave that house?" Emma's voice grew very small. "Tommy would start crying again, and Abuela would get sicker because she'd be too sad to take her medicine, and I would have to go back to singing for money on the street corners instead of singing for love." Margaret Harrison's face remained impassive throughout Emma's testimony, but Marcus caught a flicker of something, doubt perhaps or recognition, when Emma mentioned singing for love versus money. Judge Rodriguez called for a recess, and as they waited in the hallway, Margaret Harrison approached Marcus for the first time since the cathedral. "This has gone far enough," she said quietly. "That child doesn't belong in Tommy's world. She's a reminder of everything that's wrong with bleeding heart liberalism. Sarah would have adopted Emma the same day," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying a quiet fury that made Margaret step back. "Sarah spent her life fighting for children like Emma. You know that, and your guilt about not supporting her work while she was alive is eating you up inside." For the first time since he'd known her, Margaret Harrison looked genuinely shaken, but before she could respond, they were called back into the courtroom for Judge Rodriguez's decision. A ruling that would determine whether their family would survive or be torn apart by legal technicalities and social prejudice. Judge Rodriguez returned to the bench with an expression that revealed nothing, her years of experience having taught her to mask her emotions until the moment of decision. The courtroom fell silent except for the whispered prayers Marcus was sure he could hear from Rosa and the barely audible humming from Emma, a nervous habit she'd developed when anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. This case presents the court with a complex situation that goes beyond traditional custody considerations. Judge Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that would affect multiple lives. We have a father who has made unconventional choices in his grief, a grandmother who believes she knows what's best for her grandson, and two children whose lives have become intertwined in ways that defy easy categorization. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as the judge continued. However, the court's primary concern must be the welfare of the minor child, Tommy Wellington. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, I find that Mr. Wellington's decision to provide housing and care for Emma Rodriguez and her grandmother, while unusual, has resulted in demonstrable improvement in his son's physical, emotional, and psychological condition. Margaret Harrison's face went pale, but Judge Rodriguez wasn't finished. That said, the court is concerned about the lack of formal legal protections for all parties involved. If this arrangement is to continue, proper guardianship papers must be filed for Emma Rodriguez, medical and educational decisions must be formalized, and regular court supervision must be established to ensure the continued welfare of both children. The preliminary injunction was denied. Tommy would remain with Marcus, but the victory felt hollow as the judge outlined the conditions that would govern their lives going forward. Monthly social worker visits, psychological evaluations for all family members, and financial oversight of any expenses related to Emma and Rosa's care. Furthermore, Judge Rodriguez continued, Mrs. Harrison will be granted supervised visitation rights with her grandson, and any future concerns about his welfare will be given serious consideration by this court. As they left the courthouse, Emma walked between Marcus and Tommy, her small hand holding Tommy's, while her other arm supported Rosa, who was exhausted by the proceedings. The media frenzy outside was intense, but Emma seemed oblivious to the cameras and shouted questions, focused entirely on Tommy's needs. "Daddy," Tommy said as they reached the car, "does this mean Emma gets to stay forever?" "It means we're going to fight to stay together," Marcus replied carefully, "but there will be more challenges ahead." That evening, as they sat in the music room while Emma played Sarah's piano, an unexpected visitor arrived. Margaret Harrison stood at their front door, looking older and more fragile than Marcus had ever seen her. Her usual armor of designer clothing and perfect composure had been replaced by simple black slacks and a cardigan, and her eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. I think we need to talk." Marcus hesitated, but Tommy wheeled his chair to the door. "Grandma Margaret, do you want to hear the song Emma wrote about Mommy? She says Mommy visits her in dreams and helps her write the music." Margaret's composure cracked completely. She knelt down to Tommy's level, her hands shaking as she touched his face. "Tell me about these dreams, sweetheart. Tell me what Mommy says." For the next hour, Margaret listened as Emma played and sang, her voice filling the room with melodies that seemed to carry messages from beyond. The song about Sarah was haunting and beautiful, speaking of a mother's love that transcended death and a spirit that found ways to continue caring for her family. As the last notes faded, Margaret turned to Marcus with tears streaming down her face. "She sounds exactly like Sarah did when she was young, before the world made her afraid to dream out loud." "What are you saying, Margaret?" "I'm saying that maybe I've been fighting the wrong battle. Maybe Sarah did send Emma to help Tommy. And maybe I've been so afraid of losing what's left of my daughter that I couldn't see she was trying to give us something beautiful." It was the beginning of something Marcus had never thought possible. Not just peace, but understanding. But neither of them knew that their real test was still coming, and that Emma's extraordinary gift was about to attract attention that would threaten their family in ways the legal system never could. That night, as Emma sang Tommy to sleep with a lullaby that seemed to come from angels themselves, a talent scout from Nashville was listening to a video that had gone viral. 6 million views of a homeless child singing at a millionaire's memorial service. Her phone was already ringing with offers that could change everything, and not all of them had Emma's best interests at heart. 3 weeks after the courthouse victory, their quiet life was shattered by a phone call that would test everything they'd built together. Beverly Chen, no relation to David, but one of Nashville's most powerful talent agents, had been tracking Emma's story since the viral video reached 20 million views. Her offer was staggering: a recording contract, television appearances, and a tour that could make Emma a household name by Christmas. "This child has a once-in-a-generation voice," Beverly explained over the phone, her southern accent smooth as honey but sharp as a business proposition. "With proper management, she could be the next big thing. We're talking about generational wealth, college funds, opportunities most people only dream about." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever outside forces threatened their family's stability. Emma is 7 years old. She needs school, friends, stability, not a career that would steal her childhood. "Mr. Wellington, with respect, this opportunity won't wait. The music industry moves fast, and viral fame has an expiration date. Other agents are circling, and some of them won't be as considerate of the family's wishes as I am." The conversation haunted Marcus for days. Emma's talent was undeniable, and Rosa had always dreamed of her granddaughter having opportunities she'd never had. But was it fair to deny Emma a chance at something extraordinary? Or was it more unfair to expose a child to the pressures and corruptions of the entertainment industry? Tommy sensed the tension immediately. "Are they going to take Emma away too?" he asked one evening as they watched Emma teach Rosa to play simple melodies on the piano. Rosa's fingers, gnarled by arthritis and weakened by chemotherapy, struggled with the keys, but Emma's patience was infinite. "Nobody's taking anyone anywhere," Marcus said firmly, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The decision was complicated by Rosa's deteriorating condition. "Doctor." Santos had been honest about the prognosis. Rosa had perhaps 6 months left, maybe less. The treatments had bought them time, but the cancer was aggressive and her body was tired from a lifetime of struggle. Emma would need legal guardians, educational support, and long-term stability that Marcus was prepared to provide. But what if there were better options? Margaret Harrison, surprisingly, became an ally in this new crisis. "I've spent 40 years in Seattle society," she told Marcus during one of her visits. "I know what the entertainment industry does to children. I won't watch another little girl's dreams get twisted into someone else's profit." The pressure intensified when Beverly Chen arrived in Seattle with a film crew, claiming to document Emma's inspiring journey from homelessness to stardom. She set up interviews at the hospital, attempted to film Emma and Tommy in their home, and began making promises that grew more extravagant by the day. Emma could have her own foundation by the time she's 18. Beverly explained to Rosa during a hospital visit. She could help thousands of children like herself. "Don't you want that for her future?" Rosa's response was quiet but firm. "I want Emma to choose her own future when she's old enough to understand what she's choosing. Right now, she's just a little girl who needs to learn and grow and be loved." The crisis came to a head when Beverly Chen filed papers claiming that Marcus was restricting Emma's opportunities and that proper guardianship should include provisions for her career development. The same legal system that had just affirmed their family was being weaponized again, this time by outsiders who saw Emma as a commodity rather than a child. Emma herself seemed unaware of the storm swirling around her until she overheard a phone conversation between Marcus and David Chen about the legal challenges. That night, she crawled into Tommy's bed, something she did when the world felt too big and scary, and asked the question that broke everyone's heart. Do I have to leave and sing for strangers instead of singing for you? Tommy's response showed how much he'd grown in the past year. Emma, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. We're your family, and families protect each other. Right, Dad? Marcus stood in the doorway watching these two children comfort each other with the wisdom of souls much older than their years, and knew that no amount of money or fame was worth breaking the bond they'd formed. Emma's voice was indeed a gift, but it was a gift meant to heal hearts, not fill bank accounts. The next morning, he called Beverly Chen with the decision that would define their family's future. Emma Rodriguez is not for sale. Her talent is not for sale. If you continue to harass this family, you'll be hearing from our lawyers. And if any other agents think a vulnerable child is an easy target, they'll discover just how much money and influence I'm willing to spend to protect my daughter. It was the first time he'd called Emma his daughter out loud, and the word felt perfectly right. But Beverly Chen's response chilled him to the bone. You can't protect her forever, Mr. Wellington. That voice belongs to the world, and the world will find a way to claim it. The final confrontation came not in a courtroom or conference room, but in the most sacred place of all, Rosa's hospital room, where she lay surrounded by the family she'd never expected to have. It was October, 8 months after that life-changing morning at St. Mary's Cathedral, and Rosa's time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated. Beverly Chen had returned to Seattle with a new strategy, bypassing Marcus entirely and appealing directly to Emma's sense of responsibility. Your grandmother is dying, sweetheart, she said during an unauthorized visit to the hospital. Don't you want to honor her memory by sharing your gift with the world? Think of all the children you could help with the money you'd make. Emma, now 8 years old and wise beyond her years, listened politely before delivering a response that would become legendary among those who witnessed it. My abuela taught me that gifts are meant to be shared, but love isn't for sale. My songs aren't for strangers who want to make money, they're for my family who needs healing. Beverly's face flushed with frustration. You're being manipulated by people who don't understand your potential. This family is holding you back from your destiny. It was then that Rosa, using strength she didn't know she had left, sat up in her hospital bed and spoke with the voice of a woman who had spent 73 years learning the difference between dreams and delusions. Miss Chen, I was a professional singer for 15 years in Mexico City. I know what your industry does to children. You see a voice and think of profits. I see a granddaughter and think of protecting her childhood. Emma will sing because she chooses to sing, not because someone else chooses to profit from her gift. Dr. Santos, who had been monitoring Rosa's condition, stepped into the room at that moment. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, she told Beverly firmly. This patient needs rest, and this child needs protection from stress. As Beverly Chen left, making threats about legal action and missed opportunities, Rosa took Emma's hand and began to sing one final time, a Mexican lullaby about a little bird who learned that the most beautiful songs come not from performing for crowds, but from singing to those you love. Tommy, who had been quietly listening from his wheelchair, joined in with the harmony Emma had taught him, his young voice blending perfectly with theirs. Marcus found himself humming along, and even the nurses gathered in the doorway were moved to tears by the impromptu concert that felt more like a prayer. Rosa died peacefully 3 days later, with Emma holding one hand and Marcus holding the other, while Tommy sat beside them, and all four of them sang Amazing Grace, the same song that had brought them together. Her last words were to Marcus, "Take care of our little bird. Help her fly, but never forget that home is where she belongs." The funeral at St. Mary's Cathedral was standing room only, not because of Emma's fame, but because of the lives Rosa had touched during her short time as part of the Wellington family. Patients from the cancer center, nurses who had worked with her, neighbors who had been charmed by her dignity and grace. All came to honor a woman who had taught them that family isn't about blood or money, but about choosing to love unconditionally. Emma sang at the service, her voice stronger and more beautiful than ever. But she sang for Rosa, for Tommy, for the family they'd built together. When Beverly Chen tried to film the performance, she was quietly but firmly removed by security. Margaret Harrison, who had become one of Rosa's most devoted visitors during her final weeks, stood with Marcus and the children as they said goodbye to the woman who had brought such unexpected joy into their lives. "Sarah would have loved her," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She would have loved all of this." 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez Wellington, her adoption had been finalized within weeks of Rosa's death, was thriving at Seattle Country Day School, where her teachers marveled at her musical abilities, but were even more impressed by her kindness and maturity. She still sang every day, but now it was in the school choir, at family gatherings, and occasionally at charity events for causes she chose herself. Tommy had regained not just his smile, but his confidence, becoming an advocate for disabled children and working with Emma to create music therapy programs for pediatric hospitals. Their bond had deepened rather than weakened as they'd grown, proving that the connection forged in grief could flourish in joy. Marcus established the Rosa Rodriguez Memorial Foundation, dedicated to providing music education and healthcare support for immigrant families. Emma would inherit significant wealth when she turned 18, but it would come with the responsibility to continue the work of helping others that had brought their family together. On quiet evenings, Marcus would find Emma at Sarah's piano, sometimes playing the complex pieces she'd taught herself, but more often playing the simple lullabies Rosa had sung to her in Spanish. When he asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, her answer never varied. "Happy. I want to be happy and help other people be happy too." And in a world that often forgot that the most powerful gifts aren't meant to be sold but shared, Emma Rodriguez Wellington grew up understanding that her voice was indeed special, not because it could make money or win fame, but because it could heal hearts, build bridges, and prove that love really could triumph over every obstacle society could devise. The little bird had learned to fly, but she had also learned that the most beautiful flights always lead back home, to the people who love you most. And in the music room of the Wellington mansion, where Sarah's piano now bore the fingerprints of both her son and her chosen daughter, the sound of healing continued every single day.